Hi there. So this is a quick follow-up video to that first video that I put up on hanging decorative hooks. A friend of mine asked how you find a stud, so I figured we'd just do a quick video how to find a stud. We're going to use 3 different tools, a couple different techniques, and talk a little bit about how stud finders work. First tool I'm going to use is my fingers. We're going to do some percussion on the wall and see if we can locate a stud that way. We're going to do some measurement with a standard power lock tape measure, and we're going to use a stud finder. This happens to be a zircon. They're the first ones that came out with stud finders, at least the electronic type, and there's a lot of other companies that do it now. And it's an old stud finder, works great, and we're going to put it to use and talk a little bit about how it works and some other little tips and techniques that you might find helpful. Alright, well, I hope you enjoy watching. And don't forget, if you like the videos, go ahead and give them a thumbs up and subscribe, and you'll get updated about when I post new videos. So there you go. Let's go find some studs. Okay, so here I am sitting on the couch. We're going to talk about how to find a stud. That's an old joke. I'll let it go. Basically, this wall behind me is the best one I've got for showing you how this works. So the first way we're going to do this is just with our fingers. And I've got a little pencil mark here, and I can kind of compare how well I do with percussing the wall, how well I do with measuring from some different points that I'll show you, and then compare that to sort of my gold standard, which is my electronic stud finder. So let's get started. I'm going to guess there's a stud right here. And that is because there's a light switch right here. When they hang these junction boxes for the light switch, they nail it into a stud. Most people are right-handed. They're going to nail this way. So let's go ahead and wrap right here. I don't know if you can hear that. Difference in sound between the more hollow over here and the harder over here, the sort of less hollow sound. It's really important that you kind of tap with equal force, because you can change the pitch the harder you tap. And you can kind of learn to do that the way we were taught to do it in medical school. That works really well too. Put your hand flat up against the wall, leave your middle finger sort of loose, but sort of press down with the other ones. And then you tap your middle finger, and that's how you percuss, say, looking for some consolidation in lungs. It's also the way you find a stud. So there's a stud right here. I'm going to put a mark right there. Hollow, 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 less hollow. I'm going to put a mark right here. I could go all the way across the wall doing that, but that would get a little boring. Here's the second trick. Modern houses have what are called studs 16 inches on center. What that means is every 16 inches there's a stud, and the center of that stud, that's 1.5 inches wide, is the center of it is placed every 16 inches. So if I know there's a stud here, or suspect there's a stud here, I can just put my tape measure up, and my mark here is at 9 inches, so I'll go 9 plus 16 is 25, and that's right where my second mark is. I can also just add another, so 9 plus 32 is 41, and I'll put a third mark right here. Now I haven't percussed over here at all, but I suspect there's a stud right there, and that's as far as I'll go there. Let's check those with our stud finder. The way this works, there's a little button on the side and a little LED panel lights here. This is what's known as an edge detector. This is sort of your lower end electronic stud finders are going to be edge detectors. There are center detectors too, but these work just fine. And they'll show you where the edge of the stud is. So as we get to the edge of a stud, these little red lights will sort of lead up right up to the top. I'll actually start from this way. So here's my last mark. You want to start where you suspect there is not a stud. Put it flat up against the wall and push the button until that light goes off. Now it's ready to read. And as you move it across the wall, you get to the edge of a stud and that light pops up. So we'll put a little mark there. Keep going, and as it gets off the stud, it'll fall down. So that should be just about 1.5 inches between those 2 points. I'll keep going. And sometimes it's, that lower light will come on and off. There. That's the edge of the stud. So we'll put a mark here. And it kind of lost its reading, so we'll reset it. Stud there. Stud there. Okay, keep going. Edge there. Edge there. Now if I look at my original marks, that one's on the stud, that one's on the stud, and just measuring, that one's on the stud. Pretty handy little tool here, pretty handy little tool here, pretty handy little tool here. Let's talk for just a second about how these work, because I think it's pretty interesting. All right, so now that you've seen a stud finder in action, I just want to talk a little bit about how the different types work. And we're going to talk about sort of 3 different types of stud finders. The first is a magnetic stud finder. That was kind of the first on the market, and basically it uses a magnet that either swivels or thumps. And how that works is, as you're running it along the gypsum and you come across a nail or a screw that's through the gypsum into the stud, it'll activate the magnet and you'll be able to find the stud that way. Now, they're not great for that because A, you may be running it across the wall and your nails may be here and here and you just miss them, so you miss a stud. It could be that whoever hung your drywall didn't bother to pull out any nails or screw that didn't happen to go into the stud. And so you're running it along and you get a nail, but that nail's not in the stud. That's going to give you a false reading. Now, having said that, there are really some uses for magnetic stud finders. I've never had one, so I don't own one. But if I ever had a use for it, I might actually purchase one, and that would be, they do tend to work a little better, sometimes on the old lath and plaster walls where the plaster is particularly thick and the electronic stud finder has trouble sensing the wood at that depth. And you may actually find that a magnetic stud finder works better in those situations. Also, through different materials like tile, magnetic stud finders can sometimes work better. Now, if you happen to have those thin gauge steel studs that they're using in a lot of newer construction, those magnetic stud finders do work a little better. Then there's the electronic stud finder. And to understand how electronic stud finder works, you have to kind of understand how a capacitor works. There are plates on the back side of this stud finder that hold some charge and work sort of like a capacitor. I'm going to cut away to a little diagram of a capacitor to talk a little bit more about that. Okay, here's my simple diagram of a capacitor. It's 2 conducting, usually metal plates that are separated in the middle by something. You use a power source to push charges and separate them. And just in case you're wondering, I am anal retentive enough that there are equal number of positive and negative charges there. Then, depending on what is in between those 2 conducting plates, the capacitor will have different properties. The more permissive the material is to basically conduct charge, the lower the capacitance on the capacitor, and the more likely it is to have what you call dielectric breakdown. Now, the dielectric is the material that's in between there. let's say it's air. By definition, air has a dielectric constant of 1. Actually, a vacuum has a dielectric constant of 1, and air is just slightly above that. So if you tried to push too much charge onto these plates, you would have dielectric breakdown, and you'd get an arc from this side to this side. So one of the first things they put in between these two plates was paper. And paper has a dielectric constant of about 2, and that allowed you to push more charges onto the two plates. Now it's that dielectric constant that determines how an electronic stud finder works. So what a stud finder does is, so let's back up just a second. In a capacitor, they usually take these two plates and whatever's in between them and they roll them up, and that's why capacitors usually look like a little cylinder. In the stud finder, it's an open plate capacitor. So somewhere on the back of that, behind the paneling, is a metallic plate that the battery in there pushes positive charges onto one plate and separates the negative charges onto a second plate that's on the back. Now, depending on what's in between those two plates on the back of the stud finder, it's going to have a different capacitance to that open plate capacitor. So when you put it against the wall and you've just got gypsum behind it, gypsum's got a dielectric constant somewhere in the neighborhood of about 5. It's somewhere between 3 and 6, depending on the thickness and whatnot. But it's high. It's a higher number. So it takes that reading and it says, okay, this capacitor that I've got set up on the back of my device here is reading whatever capacitance it's reading based on having a dielectric constant of 5. Then as you move it across the wall and you end up behind a stud, now you've got a mixture of wood, which has a dielectric constant of about 2. Remember I said paper had a dielectric constant of about 2. And now you mix that 2 and the 5 and you get, by some very complicated algorithm, but you get a lower dielectric constant, so the capacitance changes in that open plate capacitor. The device senses that and lights up some LEDs to tell you there's a stud there. That's how an electronic stud finder works. Okay, welcome back. So the last type of stud finder is a radar stud finder, and these are kind of the newest thing on the market, and they work great. They're super. They use the same technology you'd use to radar to spot a plane in the sky. They send out an electromagnetic pulse. It echoes back depending on what that echo reads on your instrument. It either reads a thin wallboard or a thick stud behind it. They work almost perfect. They are super expensive. There's no way I'm going to be buying one of those. Just as my little limited cost benefit analysis. What's the worst that can happen if my sort of run-of-the-mill stud finder here doesn't give me an accurate reading? I put a nail through the wall and I have to patch it if it's not in a stud. I'm not going to be buying a radar stud finder, but they are super if you're, they tend to be used by, people in industry, construction workers and whatnot that, there the cost-benefit analysis might be a little different because they're going to be using them all the time, and it might be more important that they find a stud in, I don't know, somebody's house that cares a little more about whether there's a little spackle on the wall. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this, and remember, if you like my videos, give me a thumbs up. If you want to subscribe, I'd sure appreciate it. I really like doing them, and any feedback you want to give, I'd certainly welcome. So, I've enjoyed talking to you. I hope you've learned something, and we'll see you soon.